What's going on, my babies? Welcome back to another episode of the Spiritual Word. As always, I apologize for any noises in the background in advance and anything of that nature. So, my nephew just got his wisdom teeth taken out, but he didn't eat the yogurt, so my sister gave it to me. Anyways, before I start this, I like to start these off with a disclaimer by stating that these are for entertainment purposes only. Always do your own research to come to your own conclusions, to have your answers, to make your own decisions, and I believe in your ability to do so and to be your own person. Sorry if you can hear that cat outside my window. I feel very sad because it's crying, but it's also very cute. Anyways, so today's episode, I was going to read, but I don't feel like reading, so I'm not going to read, especially because if I don't want to read, I'm not going to take my time and enjoy what I'm reading. So, and because it's kind of long, and I'm tired. Like, I just don't want to read. It's not something I want to do today, and I already, chose one thing that I didn't want to do that I knew would be good for me, which was to work out. So, I'm lazy. I can only do one of those things at a time. And also because it's already 6, and I want to get this up on time. So, we're going to be talking about how to communicate with your higher self. Spirituality for dummies, today's episode. So, how to communicate with your higher self. Recognize that your higher self is not even trying to communicate to you. You are communicating to them. And the best way that I can describe what I mean is when COVID happened and only essential workers were left, quotation marks, essential workers, they're the only people that were going to work. And the essential workers were people who worked at grocery stores, people who, that had something to do with either medical or they had something to do with food. Because you only need food and shelter and water to survive. So those are the essentials, quotation marks, right? And you are the essential worker. And your higher self is like the people, who are stuck at home. Your higher self can't do what you're doing because it doesn't have feet on the ground, essentially. And there's a lot of technicalities when I talk about this because technically your higher self is you. But it's also not you, So I'm not going to get into technicalities. We're just going to talk about this in a very clear way so that you understand, so you can use this to your benefit. So you are the boots on the ground person. And your higher self is just sitting in this plane going by telling you, oh, there's a person here, there's a person there. I think I saw an animal over there, so just be careful. And your higher self is communicating to you, but ultimately you are the captain. You are the captain because you are the experiencer. So you are going to call the shots. So when people talk about how do I get in touch with my guides, angels, deities, how do I get in touch with my higher self, and when I looked down at the timestamp, it was 333. You don't get in contact. You are in contact. You don't get in contact. You already are in contact. And so you have to recognize that you are already in contact. There is nowhere to go. You're already there. There's nowhere to go to. You're already there. And it's kind of like sitting there and asking yourself, you're looking at a map and you're like, how do I get to Earth? And then someone is trying to take the paper away, but you're so stuck in the plot of it all that you're like, no, stop. You're annoying me. I'm trying to figure out how to get to Earth. And you're just looking at this map, but your feet are on Earth. And you're sitting there no, you don't get it. I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to help us. And you're sitting there, you're trying to figure out this map, and you're like, you're holding this map upside down. And you're like, I don't understand anything that this is saying. This is so freaking frustrating. I'm so freaking lost. And then finally somebody rips the paper out of your hand and they're like, look down. And you look down and you're like, What was that map for? I'm already here? This can't be right. This can't be accurate. I have to be being tricked. That's how I can describe best that you are the boots on the ground person. You are not communicating to your higher self. Your higher self, or sorry. You are communicating to your higher self. Your higher self is not communicating to you. Unless it's trying to give you some like words of encouragement or something. Or, there's a lot of technicalities. But basically, that's the gist. And so, for people who are like, I don't know how to talk to my higher self, talk to my guides, my angels, my deities, my ancestors, you're already talking to them. You're talking to your ancestors through your blood, through your experience, through your skin, through your pigment, through your eyes, through your vocabulary, through where you were physically born. And you do that all the time. You sit there and you acknowledge the storyline behind your skin color. You say, well, these are my people, these are my people's struggles. And these are where my people succeed. And, you're already getting in touch with your ancestors. Because you are your ancestors. And same thing when it comes to your guides, your angels, your deities, whatever. We are all of these things in one life or another. And you have to be conscious of that. Because most people, they're like, we're not those things, because they're closed-minded to the fact that they could be more than what they are. And most of the time they're so caught up looking at this map that they're like, where's Earth? Where's Earth? And then you're like, that map is literally where you're standing. You're standing exactly where it says to be on the map. And then they're like, you're tricking me right now. You're lying to me. Why would I have this map? That's what most people who are closed-minded, they do that. Or they sit there and they're like, you don't get this. I'm in charge. I got this. And, the struggles of being stubborn. Trust me, I get it. I'm fucking stubborn. But, that's the best way I can describe it. And another way that I can describe it is that your higher self is reading your notes, your footnotes. It's like sitting there, you're writing this book, and you're like, well, P.S., I want to see this, but I don't know how to do that. And then your higher self's like, oh, you want to do this, but you don't know how to do that. Oh, I got you. And then it sits there, and it's like, I'm going to drop something into their lap, and hopefully they accept, because if they don't accept, I'm going to support them either way, if they accept, if they don't accept. So it's up to them. And then you sit there, you get something fall out of the sky, and it's like, oh, a coupon for a restaurant that I wanted to go to. Hey, didn't I just write that in my footnotes? And then you take this coupon, you go to the restaurant, and you're like, oh my gosh, I literally don't even know how this happened, but how funny. Coincidentally, huh? Coincidence. And I don't think coincidences are coincidences, or else that word wouldn't be real. Just like luck. It's like, if luck wasn't a thing, the word luck would not be a thing. That's how I feel about coincidences. Coincidences wouldn't be a thing if there was no coincidences. That's simple. So when people are like, oh, you're just lucky, or that's a coincidence. No. That's you and your higher self being so freaking in tune with each other. And how you get in tune with your higher self is to get in tune with your emotions. Because your emotions are your vibrations, and it's how you send it out to the higher self. You sit there, and the footnotes are like, you sit there and you're like getting really, really happy because you're thinking about a cheeseburger, and you're like, wow. You're just sitting there and you're like, wow, cheeseburger. And then somebody, I don't know, your friend or your mom or your dad or your siblings knock on your door, and you're like, hey, let's go get cheeseburgers. And you're like, oh my god, I was just craving that. And they're like, bet, I'll pay. You're like, free? And cheeseburger. What a coincidence. That's your connection. That's how you communicate with your higher self. You're not using words. And I think that's what a lot of people, they trip up about. You're not using words. So you can't just sit there and be like, give me this thing, give me this thing, give me this thing. Most people, that's where they get tripped up, because they're like, I always ask for this thing, but they don't bring it to me. I always ask my higher self to bring me this, and it doesn't bring it to me. And that's the energy you're giving to your higher self. And your higher self doesn't understand words. All it understands is like me, 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 me. You know? Like, it's not understanding any words. So if you're sitting there aggressively saying, you could literally just be making noises, you know, because words are just noises. And so you could be sitting there angrily being like, meep, moop, brah. You know? Like, that's what it understands. It understands your emotions. To you, this higher self is like, think of this as like, your higher self is a mom and you are a baby who doesn't have words. What your mom does understand is how you're feeling. And if you're sitting there and you're crying, it's going to sit there and be like, oh, what's wrong? You know, because it understands why you're crying. But it's not going to be the same relationship as a mom would. Like, a mom wants to nurture you and be like, what's wrong? Let's try to get away from feeling like this. But the higher self doesn't understand what you're communicating. So when you're crying, it's like, I don't know why you're crying. And then it tries to give you stuff and tries to give you stuff and tries to give you stuff. And those things, ultimately, they just make you cry more. Because it's not what you're asking for. But your higher self doesn't understand why you're crying. So how you communicate with your higher self is through feelings. And when I looked at the timestamp, it was 12:12. You have to use your conscious power to be like, okay, let's feel this purposefully, so that the higher self understands what I'm trying to communicate. Because whatever we repeat is what it knows to bring to us. And the higher mind, or the higher self, is constantly giving back to you what you're feeding the universe. And it's very technical. There's a bunch of technicalities. We're not going to get into that. But it's basically like, I'm going to give you this paper, and the higher self is like, oh, you gave me this paper? But no, I gave this to you. This is for you. I love you so much. Take this paper. And then you take the paper and you're like, didn't I just give this to you? Because I don't want it. And then you give it to them and they're like, they liked it. They liked the paper that I gave them. So I'm going to give it back to them. And you take the paper again. You're like, this is not what I freaking asked for. That's how you communicate with your higher self. You get what you give. And so if you're giving the higher self this paper, let's say, for example, this paper is your vibrational feeling, your vibrational resonancy of not having enough, feeling frustrated, crying all the time, being mad at the people around you because they trigger you, or whatever the case is, right? Or being mad at the world because we're all killing the environment and nobody cares. Or because there's so much war, famine, and suffering happening that you hate the human race. That's what you're giving. You're giving your anger to the world. So what do you bring back into the world? What does the higher self bring back to you? What you gave it. And so it's giving you back this anger, this hatred for the world. It's giving back all this frustration. It's giving back all of these people who don't care about the environment. It's giving back all the people who are, contributing to the cause of suffrage. All the people who frustrate you, it's bringing you more people to frustrate you, because it's like, oh, this is what you want to see. This is what you're putting your attention to. And this is a vibrational experience. And so if you want to consciously communicate to your higher self, it's very simple. Just feel what you would like to feel. And that's hard for a lot of people because of their chemistry in their brain. Like, for example, people who are clinically diagnosed with like depression or schizophrenia or autism or stuff that they don't physically, chemically have control over. And for those people, there's things in place to help them. So if you have any of those things, obviously you can get help. So there should be no reasons for you to not get what you're asking for, because what you're asking for is how you're feeling. And there's things to help you along the way, like therapy. There's also medication, which medication, I'm not saying that it's extremely helpful, but there's also different ways of medication. You can go do yoga if you feel stressed as a de-stressor. You can drink, there's chemicals out there that you can drink, or mixtures of chemicals like creatine that helps relax you. So if you have anxiety, then you can get relaxed with this thing, and it's help and it's guidance. But you can't, like, I know a lot of people who take pills for like depression and shit, and I don't think that that's helpful because you're using kind of like a crutch. But if you need the crutches at first, like when you break your leg, I'm not going to sit there and scold you for using crutches. You know? It's after your foot heals, you're so used to these crutches that you rely on them. So that's where it gets to be like iffy. But like I said, there's a lot of technicalities. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. I'm just saying. But those are the only people who have real excuses to why they can't control their consciously control their reality, or who can't consciously manifest at like really fast rates. And even then they are. Everybody is. It's just that they're not consciously creating what they want. If that makes sense. Like most people who are sad, they don't want to be sad. You know what I mean? Like most people, they don't want to feel pain. So if they're feeling pain and they bring more pain, it's not conscious manifestation. It's subconscious manifestation. Because your subconscious is sad. But the conscious part of you is like, I don't want to be sad anymore. That's what I mean by that. But to each their own, because life is hard, and take it from me because like I didn't understand these concepts years ago. So you learn and grow at your own pace. And it's not that big a deal. I'm just saying, like, if you know what I know now, and you're still maneuvering through these other things, gotta think about that. So, besides that, I'm gonna try to end this as clear and concise as I can. So, communicating with your higher self is not communication that goes out, it's communication that stays within, and you will create from what is within, because your higher self is within you. And so, whatever you're feeding the world, you will see it come back to you. And so if you're constantly feeding all these frustrating situations, sadness, anger, resentment, whatever the case is for you, that's what you're going to get back. And if you decide, okay, let's do something that's going to help me feel better about either my situation, my life, myself, maybe help others, or whatever the case is. And when you help yourself, you help others in return. Like, let's say you are recycling for a selfish reason. You're like, I want to survive, so I'm going to recycle. I could care less about what anybody else is doing. And then you recycle, and, by nature, some people are like, hey, can I help you? And you're like, I guess, like, this is for me, so if you want to help, that's even better for me. And then they help you, and then before you know it, you have like 5 people behind you who are helping you recycle, which was something that you just wanted to do for yourself. And that's how you communicate with your higher self. You just do what you want to do, and your higher self will hear that. And if you're not conscious of that power itself, then you kind of just float around until you use it in a specific direction. And whatever that direction is should be pointed to you. Like, let's say, for example, if you're like, I want to see, I'll use one of my own personal examples. And this is gonna get. Actually, I'm not gonna say that. So, I want to see myself like look very healthy and like strength wise and like feel very fit and be able to run if I want to run or be able to do push-ups if I want to do push-ups, which today was my first day of actually being able to do like full really low push-ups or lower than I have ever done. Or not ever, but have done in a really long time. And so in order for me to get there, I had to be willing to do those things. And those things aren't necessarily like fun for me. Like it's not as fun for me to do push-ups in my room than it is to go like rock climbing or than it is to go play basketball or than it is to go play softball or something of that nature, you know? Something where I'm doing things for fun. And in me doing that, the communication from my higher self is like, "Oh, you want to get fit? Oh, okay. So we'll do this thing." And what I'm giving to myself is fitness. And that will pay off because I'm feeding it constantly. But it has to be a constant feeding of this thing. You have to constantly be in communication with your higher self and say, "This is what I want to see." But the physical actions are your communication. Like if you decide to do the same thing that I'm doing, you're like, "You know what? I want to get fit." And you decide you want to go for walks every day, and then all of a sudden those walks turn into runs. And then all of a sudden those runs turn into working out. And then after a year of doing that, you're like, you look at yourself in the mirror and you're a completely different person than you were a year ago. You look completely different. And you're like, "Wow, I did that." And all I had to do was just do this thing, which I don't know. I did not know where to start. Most people, they don't know where to start. And that's what trips them up. But basically, your vibration is communication with your higher self. And so it's about how you feel and what you're doing, and a combination of the two. Like when I work out, I feel proud of myself. And that good feeling of feeling proud of myself feeds itself. So, like, the next day when I work out and I do that thing, I'm more proud of myself because I've been doing it consecutively. You know what I mean? And then if I have days where I'm like, I want to take a break, I'm proud of myself for taking a break because I'm not overdoing something. Like I know a lot of people who will get like who will literally hurt themselves trying to be strong. Like I know a lot of people who will lift way, way, way more than they should, and then they end up hurting their back, or they end up hurting their stomach, or they end up hurting some part of their insides because they're doing this, but they don't want to like care about themselves. You know what I mean? Like they're doing this thing, but most of the time, most people who hurt themselves from doing this type of thing, they hurt themselves because they weren't doing it for that purpose of helping themselves. Like, I'm working out to get fit. I'm not working out so I can be the strongest in the fucking room and intimidate everybody else. You know what I mean? Like, your intentions really matter when it comes to doing these things. And if you're doing things because you want to do them, because they're going to help you, and in return of helping you, you help the world, because if you could change one person, you've done your part. It's like if I decided that I wanted to switch to solar panels, and I inspire 5 of my friends to switch to solar panel because of one decision that I made. That's intentions, right? And when you have good intentions, the universe hears that shit. And that's your communication with your higher self. The intentions, the feelings, and the actions combined. If I'm doing things because I want to see myself do good, other people are going to look at me and be like, "Wow, I should do good for myself too." And that's how you do good for the world. You do good for yourself, and in return, you're feeding the world good. You're feeding the world good, feeding the world good, feeding the world good, because I'm doing good for me. So I'm feeding good for me. But I'm not just me, I'm actually you too. So when I do good for me, I do good for us. And when I do good for us, you do good for me. And when we both do good for each other, and we're both doing good for each other, and us is doing good for us, we change the actual physical experience. And that's how you change your physical reality, through being in touch with your higher self. Your higher self is in touch with you constantly. It's never disconnected. And it loves you so unconditionally that it doesn't matter. And your higher self is this feeding. It's this process. That's your higher self. Your higher self is sitting here and giving to the world good. And then the higher self is like, okay, give that back. I'm just trying to look at what you're giving me so I can give it back to you. That's the higher mind, quotation marks, or the higher self. The higher self is literal, it's the literal process. So it's not like a being, which I think that's what trips a lot of people up. They're like, my higher self is like God, right? Yes, technically, because there's a lot of technicalities, but no, not in this context. In this context, it's the process. And you know how people, they have that cheesy saying, trust the process, trust the process, trust the process. That's your higher self, the process. You know how there's a Miley Cyrus song called The Climb, and she's like, it's not about the journey, or it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And that cheesy phrase, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. That's your higher self. And you will never get those moments back. So, really keep yourself in check. And it's not about, what you're doing, it's about, just doing the thing. And the more you just do this thing to enjoy it, the more enjoyment you will bring, because it's a combination of how you feel and what you're doing when you feel this. Like if I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so proud of myself for uploading this whole week. That's what is going to bring me more reasons to be proud of myself. And it doesn't even have to be anything crazy. It could just be the fact that next week I upload for the full week and I'm like, oh my gosh, wow. And when I go to work and then I come home and I'm like, oh my gosh, I get to do a podcast. How fun. That's the process. And that's your higher self. You make the decision, your higher self executes, because your higher self is the process. So just do the thing with the intention that you want to do the thing. That's really it. And I think that's as clear as I can make it, because I had said this in a different recording of myself. I can't teach you what your higher mind is, what your higher self is, because it's like trying to tell you, or it's like trying to tell a blind person what air looks like. How can I describe that? What's the texture? Does it have a pattern? Does it have a color? They don't even know what patterns look like. They don't even know what colors look like. They don't even know what textures look like. So how am I going to describe air? I can't. They don't even know what it looks like. Do they know what transparent is? They've never seen it. So it's very hard to describe something to a blind person if they've never seen it, especially if you have a hard time describing it to somebody who can actually see. You know what I mean? Like, how do I describe to you what air is? That's really hard. And yeah, so I'm gonna end this here. Thanks for tuning in and tapping in. As always, I hope that these were helpful in any way, shape, and form, or entertaining in some way, shape, and form. And thanks for being here. Without me, there would be no you. Without you, there would be no me. I love you, my babies, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.